Thank you. Everybody's afternoon going well so far? Is this the most exciting CENIC conference you've ever been to? Yes? Come on. Woo! All right, thank you. All right, well, it is my absolute pleasure to introduce Skyler Ditchfield, CEO and co-founder of GeoLinks. Full disclosure, he is also my boss, but even if he weren't my boss, I would be happy to be introducing him. Skyler, like I said, co-founder and CEO of GeoLinks. GeoLinks is the fastest growing WISP in America, recognized as an industry innovator and thought leader. Skyler is currently on the FCC's Broadband Deployment Advisory Committee, including the recently formed Disaster Response and Recovery Working Group. And he is also a Strategic Advisory and Fundraising Committee member for Shelby, which is Schools, Healthcare, Libraries, Broadband Coalition. With both a passion and dedication to bringing connectivity to anchor institutions, Skyler has made it one of GeoLinks' founding missions to close the digital divide in both California and throughout the country. And under his leadership, GeoLinks has worked with CENIC to successfully connect rural schools and libraries throughout California, earning CENIC's 2018 Corporate Partnership Award, among other awesome awards that we've won. I mean, the list is so long. Today, Skyler will speak about GeoLinks' recent award under the FCC's Connect America Fund II auction program and how this federal subsidy will allow GeoLinks to continue its work to close the digital divide. So without further ado, Skyler.
Thank you very much, Melissa. So, like she mentioned, if you're not familiar, there's something called the Connect America Fund, which we just went through the second iteration. The first one was done a few years back, which is focused on connecting rural parts of America, providing subsidy dollars to providers that are going to bring connections specifically to residential locations. The first go around was only open to the major incumbent telcos, so your AT&Ts, Frontiers, etc. And the second go around here, the FCC opened its book to the mid-sized and smaller providers. Melissa and I made rounds at the FCC speaking with them about that significantly beforehand, what it might look like, what fixed wireless would bring to the table in terms of an alternative option for a lot of these hard-to-reach areas. They found that through the first go-around, where there was actually a much higher amount of dollars available. It was $20 billion on the first one. This is $2 billion on the second. Was they were reaching kind of the limitations of terrestrial-based infrastructure to reach these hard-to-reach areas. And while there was anxiety within the commission about fixed wireless, they knew it was an emerging technology that was beginning to fill a lot of gaps and should be something that should be very much evaluated. Luckily, they came to the conclusion to go ahead and do that. So I want to talk a little bit about the program that we won, the regions that we're going to be covering, but really how that can be beneficial for more than just the purpose of getting to an end user home, where an overbuild of that, which we plan to do, can bring in opportunities for anchor institutions such as schools, libraries, healthcare, other potential businesses and things in those areas. So just a little bit, like Melissa told you, about GeoLinks. We are a fixed wireless operator that operates predominantly in every corner of California right now. We're working on expanding outside the state. And we've been using our fixed wireless network that uses fiber optic backhaul. Obviously, we try to bring fiber as close as we can to the endpoint. But a lot of the regions that we operate in means, 20, 30, 40, 50-mile fixed wireless shots. We've got one operating the longest in California at 127 miles for a single link right now, and multi-hop distances up to almost 200 miles. So we do business class internet, which is what we do for our anchor institutions. That's our number one service that we do. We do have some old legacy rural residential in there as well, and we'll talk about how this program takes us into the rural residential footprint again. We have other services as well that are over the top, such as voice, SD-WAN, direct cloud on-ramping and peering as well. So just a quick overview on how fixed wireless works. We build it in a redundant design everywhere that we possibly can. Ideally, that's a mesh design where multiple towers are interconnected to one another. Obviously, that depends on the terrain. Sometimes we're building from point A to point B, crossing a significant distance where you can't build that mesh design or it's cost prohibitive. So we build a redundant and parallel path with redundant routers, redundant switches, redundant power supplies, monitoring, and redundant radio paths. Your secondary radio path typically is lower capacity than the primary because that allows you to do it cost effectively but still have a backup in the event of a failure in a remote region. So our footprint, we use a lot of solar powered. Right now we're operating about 55 to 60% solar powered stations, about 40 to 45% grid powered stations. Been playing with wind turbines to reduce the amount of solar panels needed in some of these very high elevation locations. Solar power and the battery systems are what drive the cost up on those up significantly. So we're trying to find ways to ultimately bring that cost down. The real beauty of it, though, is clean power. So grid power goes up and down, can have brownouts and things like that. We've got solar-powered sites operating 6.5 years with now no downtime or outages. It also allows you to be very flexible in terms of where you can place those, so you can create the quickest path to your endpoint, ultimately reducing the cost, or go in areas where traditional infrastructure doesn't exist. So that big red or orange and yellow tower that you see there in the picture is kind of what people think of as a traditional comm tower, something of that nature. A lot of what we do are horizontally distributed arrays. While we do operate on a lot of those are usually AC grid power sites that are existing that we're co-locating on. When we're building the new sites from scratch, we try to be very visually unobtrusive, environmentally unobtrusive, so placing the solar panels back where they can't be seen, doing horizontal distributed antenna arrays that are painted to match. So by the time you get 70, 80 feet back, you can't see those at all. And that's if we're doing distribution. If we're doing point to point, then we've got 2 to 4 dishes on a site that are performing the relay. Talked about this real quick. We talked about some of our partners here that we've been working with here within the state of California. CENIC obviously has been one of our biggest partners. The Schools Healthcare Library Broadband Coalition we're active with. Melissa was elected to their board this year, so we're doing what we can in terms of continuing to raise awareness and funding for those and working with other consortiums across California. So jumping ahead to the federal dollars, which was the point of this this speech, we won the majority of our dollars, even though you can see a spattering across the state here on the eastern border, going up from the southern border over towards the Sierras, all the way up to the top of California. Now you can see there's a lot in the those purple dots in the kind of central southern parts, and then again in the central, very northern parts. The population density there is quite a bit lower, so I think it's about 70% of the build out is going to be along those mountainous regions that border Nevada. This is going to be up to a 6-year build out. That's the time frame allowed by the FCC. Our goal is to accomplish this in 4 years. We have to make milestones along the way in terms of build out requirements. But what we really want to do is start raising awareness of this now. So we're going to be receiving our first funding in the next 60 days, which means we've done our kind of initial planning and work, but then we get deep into the planning. If any of you know, when you do your first design, your second design ultimately gets revised, and there's 3, 4, 5 designs that are revised depending on availability of land, procuring communications towers and other things like that. But we want to raise the awareness of the areas that we're going into and start working with consortiums, anchor institutions, and other groups in these areas so that we can plan ahead, whether it's an RFP, a running out contract, etc., to be able to know that, hey, there's a school, a library, a hospital, or something like that in this region that we're going to be building nearby. And if we can put that into the planning phase, we can ultimately bring that cost down from what it would have been significantly lower, because we're going to be building the backhaul middle mile already. So now we just need to complete the last mile piece to reach these extremely rural areas. So we've been working with some groups already, starting to map that out, trying to identify some ourselves. But again, like I said, we want that word to get out there and spread to see where we can help bring solutions and, advance kind of costing. So some of these places, have an idea, oh, it's going to be X dollars for this location. We say, no, we can be in this territory in the next roughly 18 to 24 months. Let's start planning that from your bidding perspective. We can get you some upfront pricing that may come down as we continue to bid in more. But the more and more we're able to pool in these areas, the more we can bring the ultimate cost down for everyone in these regions. And I'm happy to send some of these maps to you guys afterwards and coordinate with you for anyone that's interested as well. So the tiers of service that we're going to be doing for the residential locations out there, and there's about 11,000 homes that we're passing by that we're needed to bring service to as per our federal contract, is 100 megabits down, 20 megabits up, which for these areas was the second highest speed tier and really the fastest that's viable in these rural locations for fixed wireless. In my opinion, 100 by 20 quality service rate is a fantastic upgrade from a satellite-based service, dial-up, or maybe a very weak copper service, if they had anything at all. We're planning to overbuild the network from the start already. We do have some existing network that's going to be utilized in these regions. Most of these areas are very far from fiber. So again, the more pre-planning that we can do to increase capacity, the better for spectrum planning, asset planning, and ultimately where those distribution points will be, because you're going to be beefing up from the long haul to the middle mile and ultimately to the last mile. Jump ahead to the next slide here. So just give you a little bit of an idea of kind of what went on with the Connect America Fund, and there's other regions, if there's people from other states here that were awarded. So if you see in Nevada, the blue pieces here were awarded at the 25 megabit by 3 area, which was where a lot of providers landed. We went a bit higher to the 100 megabit by 20. There's an opportunity, not just with us, but with many other providers that are building out in these locations, to be able to leverage these federal dollars that are out there for other opportunities. And that's what I really see a big benefit of it. We weren't a residential provider per se, other than a few select kind of remote regions or where people were looking to procure business type services at a residential location. But we saw this opportunity and we said, if we can get it at a price point that the subsidy can get us to a point that there's a return on investment for the residential side, but really provide an opportunity to build to these extremely rural areas where the institutions probably will never see a high bandwidth or a high quality circuit for many, many more years. And then also potentially enable cellular-based services by providing those backhaul where those don't exist as well. We can provide a lot more public benefit. And I think that's the whole key of the program. So much public benefit can it provide? Now there's the issues of different funding silos like Connect America Fund. You've got E-rate and all the different ones that are out there for healthcare from the federal as well, which we've been working together with CENIC to try to consolidate those funding silos. But unfortunately, that's a long term. It's a big ship to steer at the FCC. While people generally support the idea, it's really going to take more collaborative work in terms of when these programs come together, starting to work together, forecasting a couple years out into the future as the build-outs happen, to where you can find the synergies in that. So I just wanted to give you a little bit of the surrounding areas, and we've got maps of the whole country. They're also publicly available, but if anyone's interested, we're happy to share those as well. This is a southern region here, right near the border. So you see these areas are census block groups that are broken up into very small little boxes. But the reality is we're going to be filling in bandwidth in all these areas, because as you build a fixed wireless path, your backhaul and your middle mile is going to come through these regions and then be distributed out via point to multi-point on the last mile segments. So you more almost want to draw a line around the entire area and say that this is all now near net, where it was completely off net or very far from net. And some of these areas, even in the black, may be completely on net and have line of sight to our facilities. So a lot larger portion of California is enabled now, other than just these small little pockets we have to hit. So a little bit more high level in terms of the reverse auction. There was $2 billion put together for subsidy over 10 years. So that's 198 million a year in subsidy. 150 million was actually awarded, which is another 500 million that'll be coming back up at some point. It was broken down per state. California was one of the largest states awarded at 47 million in total. A couple of the other plain states like Oklahoma received a lot as well. Again, a lot of fixed wireless this time around. I think 51% of it went to fixed wireless providers versus 0 in the last auction. So you're seeing, a big shift in that trend, mainly because fixed wireless is becoming a technology that people are now starting to understand that when built properly and correctly, it's a very viable solution. It can have the same latency and jitter as fiber when you're using FCC licensed links on a point-to-point design. When you are using unlicensed or point-to-multipoint, you definitely introduce additional latency or jitter, which can be used in residential applications, but for anchor institution locations, you can see the same exact quality of circuit. We've also found that a lot of the communities that we're coming into, because they are bandwidth starved, for lack of a better term, they're welcoming us with open arms and actually finding ways that they can kind of move themselves to the top of the list in terms of deployment. So enabling use of, maybe water tanks or public facilities where land rents are typically paid, lowering those maybe in for trade for services, or just to have themselves moved up in the deployment. So I expect to see another round of CAF coming up, time frame to be determined, if I'd estimate another year or two. And hopefully we see more of these areas filled in, especially as the broadband baseline continues to move up. Unfortunately, it was dropped to 10 by 1 from 25 by 3 at the federal level. And we'd like to see that go back up to 25 by 3, if not a little bit higher, in terms of the broadband demands. And again, it's really about getting a quality circuit out there. People can get those types of speeds on satellite, but when you're talking, geosynchronous satellite, you're looking at 600-700 milliseconds of latency, which for web surfing is very slow. Now, there has been talk about, the low Earth orbiting satellites that could be, sub 60 milliseconds of latency. SpaceX has got their program that they're doing on that, which looks very interesting. There's a lot to be sorted out there in terms of the density of deployment that's needed, coordination for not running into another, and there's a lot of wireless links that have to interconnect between those satellites, that there's a lot of technology to be sorted out. While that I think ultimately will happen, we're probably looking at a more realistic time frame of 8 to 15 years before we really see significant coverage on that, and there's a lot of investment metrics that have to be made and met along the way as well. We talked about the service requirements. So the gigabit tier was really for the fiber guys, and everything below is fixed wireless available today. While we can do gigabit and 500 megabits on fixed wireless, that is short range and isn't really applicable for rural settings like this, where we're having to go several miles from the broadcast location to the end user. We talked about the build-out requirements, so we're looking to be at 40% by the third year. That definitely means we will be at 20-30% in year 2, 60% by year 4, 80% by year 5, 100% by year 6. So this is where the coordination comes in. We'll be working our way through the state from the most densely populated areas to the more sparse areas, and taking into consideration, again, synergies or opportunities that are there with other anchor institutions. So that's where we want to start collaborating with people so that we can build those out and meet the demands sooner than later that those locations have as well. So this is kind of a drill in of a few of the different counties. You see Imperial County here. Again, this was done by the old mapping tools that have been discussed in some of the other workshops here at the FCC, where if one home was reported having service, then a census block group, it was deemed served. There's a lot of areas surrounding here that are not served, but you see the spatterings of areas that we need to cover. So ultimately, the coverage that we build with a fixed wireless broadcast radius is going to fill in a lot of these gaps. So like I said, if you're near this, you're near net, and ultimately building a dedicated connection out to an anchor institution is something we want to accomplish with this project and can plan for in terms of capacity planning. Everything is going to be built for scalability, and because we're covering a very large area, going back to my earlier talk of the design that we've done with a mesh design, it's going to lend itself to that mesh design with typically 3 to 4 backhaul points coming in and out of each fixed wireless tower. There's a quick overview map of all the awards that were done across the U.S. You'll see there's a lot of areas in gray here where there were no winning bidders. So it was done in what's called a reverse auction format. They started at a certain price point. The FCC deemed what was a reasonable price point for this to be deployed, and then providers bid on that, going down, down, down until there was one provider remaining. We won at the highest dollar per household of any provider. One reason because of the very remote regions that we went into, because we do a lot of builds that are solar based. There's no facilities available in these locations. They were very far from existing copper infrastructure and prohibitively expensive for fiber buildouts. But you can see there's a lot of territory here that's still uncovered. Just some connection here, email, Twitter, and LinkedIn if you want to connect afterwards. Said we're happy to, there we go. Share maps, data, talk with you guys in advance, look at what your bandwidth requirements are, your planning, when your next RFP cycle may be. Even if that's a couple years out, that's something to start taking into consideration now, because this is going to be a multi-year phased build out. And then I'd just like to open the floor to any questions and or any other input. Yes. And I think Lexi and Melissa will be running microphone over there, so we can definitely hear you all.
Hello, my name is Robert Erguin from the city of Santa Cruz. I had a question on these build outs that you guys do off-site to these rural areas. Is that because it would be just cost prohibitive to do fiber at this time, and this is a lot faster way to get these areas connected?
Yeah, absolutely. So a lot of these areas they're 100 miles or more from any existing fiber infrastructure today. So that means we're going to be building a lot of multi-gigabit backhaul off the existing fiber. We're going to be utilizing as much existing provider fiber that we can, major providers junctioning into those, and then distributing out via fixed wireless, pretty much long haul, middle mile, they're going to call it, to get there. There may be little dense pockets where we do some fiber if there's a group of homes that are 40 or 50 that are close together, or using something like GPON as well. But probably 90+% of this build out, if not more, will be fixed wireless.
Thank you.
Absolutely. Thank you. Any other? All right.
I have a question. This is hey. I'm going to challenge you just a little bit.
Okay.
So the map of the United States, and you touched on this briefly, but there was a lot of gray left,
Yes.
and those were areas that were eligible for CAF funding but didn't get CAF funding. From a policy perspective, what kind of things would you like to see, or do you think would be helpful to get those areas filled in?
Policy perspective, it'd be nice to see the funding dollars come up again. A lot of the providers that participated in this go around, like I said, earned about on average 4 times less in terms of subsidy dollars per household passed than we did, which means they're going to be investing their own dollars to reach these locations. And a lot of them are smaller providers. There's a lot that could be looked at and learned from the first go around with CAF, where much higher dollars were paid out to the big providers, and they weren't reached as quickly as they had, contracted to be. I think people got a little overzealous in terms of grant dollars and free money, and a lot of providers, got into this thinking that, grant dollars will solve all problems, and now they're realizing, the difficulty of the build. So from a policy perspective, I think the FCC needs to be looking at how they can right-size the funding for each area and for each technology, not just kind of a one-size-fits-all. Any other questions?
Hello there.
Hi.
I'm with Public Library, San Diego County Public Library.
Yes.
I just recently learned of Shelby and immediately became a member.
Great.
And I know you're involved, and I think we have other public libraries here. Can you maybe say a word about what Shelby does and why we might want to support them?
Absolutely. So we learned of Shelby, I think it was about 3 years ago or so. And they're an advocacy group that represents the anchor institutions, schools, healthcare, libraries. Broadband Coalition is the acronym. They do a lot of advocacy work out there at the FCC, at the federal level, pushing for, one topic that Melissa, who's on their board from our company, is working on is the consolidation of funding silos. So let's bring together E-rate, let's bring together healthcare so that we can get networks deployed in areas much quicker and more cost effectively. They're really the arm that kind of sits there in DC that advocates for these anchor institutions. And they listen very, very well to every one of the constituents out there. So I would definitely urge people, it's not that expensive to join. They're a nonprofit group that needs our support. They had a backing from the Bill and Melinda Gates Foundation for a number of years that got them off the ground. That has since gone away. So we've been working hard on trying to think of new ways to continue to raise their funding. I've been very impressed with the dedication from their leadership, from their CEO, John, to this mission. I mean, to show you his level of dedication, he offered to take a pay cut even when their funding was cut to, continue their mission and push it forward. And I think you will find that you get a lot of bang for your buck in joining them. And there's a lot of collaboration, and you'll find there's a lot of people that are thinking the same way that you are out there, that you may not be aware of, and realize that you're not an island and your voice can be heard. So I would really urge people to put it in their budgets for this, coming next year, join and support it. There's not a lot of groups out there that are great, that really represent the needs of, the anchor institutions out there in terms of broadband. But Shelby is really one of them. It's been fantastic. Yes. Yeah, so we're interconnected at a couple of different data centers with CENIC directly, layer 2. So all traffic, goes directly there. We do provide commodity-based internet services to enterprise and everything else, but yeah, we are directly paired with CENIC. Any other questions from anybody else? Great. Well, thank you guys very much. Appreciate your time. And like I said, feel free to reach out, follow up with an email. We'd be happy to chat with you on any further questions or any way that we could help. Thank you.